6-year-old Dennis Martin vanished within minutes while his father was watching him. On June 14, 1969, during a family camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Dennis ducked behind a bush to surprise the adults. A harmless game children play 1,000 times. His father, William Martin, watched him disappear behind the foliage. Dennis never came out. What followed would become one of the largest search operations in American history. 1,400 searchers, 60 Green Berets, helicopters, bloodhounds, and 15 days of desperate searching. They found child-sized footprints leading to a stream, one barefoot and one matching the Oxford shoe Dennis wore. Then the trail vanished. Despite the most advanced tracking techniques available and one of the most massive searches ever conducted, Dennis Martin was never seen again. You pack your bags, check your map, tell loved ones where you're going. But what if none of that mattered? Within hours, over 100 volunteers combed the mountainside. Within days, that number swelled to nearly 1,400 searchers, including 60 Green Berets, using the most advanced tracking techniques known to man. They searched for 15 days. Helicopters circled overhead. Bloodhounds searched through the dense underbrush. Child-sized footprints were discovered. One bare, one in an Oxford shoe matching what Dennis wore, leading to a stream before vanishing. But despite this potential lead and the massive search effort, no other trace of Dennis was ever found. Not a shred of clothing, no further clues. The forest was silent, offering no answers, no closure, only an oppressive emptiness. But Dennis Martin's case isn't an anomaly. It's part of a troubling reality. Every year, thousands of search and rescue missions are launched in America's national parks for missing persons. Most are found. Many are not. And among those who vanish completely, there exists a subset of cases so bizarre, so defying of logical explanation, that they've spawned their own dark mythology within search and rescue communities. Cases where experienced hikers disappear on well-marked trails in perfect weather. Cases where children vanish within sight of their parents. Cases where the missing are later found miles away, in terrain so rugged it should have been physically impossible for them to reach, with no memory of how they got there. Or they're never found at all. These aren't stories of people getting lost and succumbing to the elements in predictable ways. These are cases where the evidence, or the complete absence of it, defies everything we understand about human behavior, search patterns, and wilderness survival. Park rangers whisper about them in hushed tones, careful not to alarm visitors, but unable to shake the unsettling truth. Something about these disappearances defies normal explanation. What truly happens when someone walks into the forest and never comes back? Why do bloodhounds refuse to track certain trails? How do people vanish from areas that were searched multiple times by professionals? And perhaps most disturbing of all, why are the disappearances increasing? The answers lie hidden in case files that span decades, in testimonies that sound too strange to believe, and in the haunted eyes of park rangers who've seen things they can't explain. Their stories will haunt you. If you want to uncover more mysteries that authorities don't want you to know about, subscribe to Dark Dimensions X and hit that bell. Because the deeper we go into these case files, the more disturbing the patterns become. And trust me, you won't want to miss what we've uncovered next. Stacy Ann Aras was not a careless hiker. On July 17, 1981, the 14-year-old was traveling with her father and a group of 6 others on horseback through Yosemite National Park's backcountry, heading toward the Sunrise High Sierra camp. When the group arrived at the camp that afternoon, Stacy showered, changed clothes, and told her father she wanted to stretch her legs after spending the entire day in the saddle. She grabbed her Olympus camera and said she was walking toward the Sunrise Lakes to take photographs. Her father reminded her to change from flip-flops into hiking boots, which she did. An elderly member of the group, 77-year-old Gerald Stewart, decided to accompany her on the walk. The two set off together toward the lakes, which were roughly 1.5 miles away. After walking for nearly half an hour, Gerald grew tired and sat down on a boulder to rest. Others in the group witnessed Stacy continuing on alone, camera in hand. That was the last time anyone ever saw her. When she didn't return, her father immediately organized a search. They found only one thing: the lens cap from her camera lying on the ground near where she'd last been seen. The camera itself, Stacy, everything else, vanished. Search and rescue teams arrived within hours, deploying tracking dogs that picked up her scent trail leading away from the lake. But then the trail stopped abruptly on solid ground, with no water, no cliffs, nothing to explain why the scent simply ended. Over 100 searchers scoured the area for weeks. They found nothing. Not her windbreaker, not a footprint, not a single thread of clothing. It was as if she'd evaporated into the mountain air. What makes Stacy's case even more chilling is what happened afterward. Her father spent years returning to that spot, desperately searching for any trace of his daughter. The forest had taken Stacy Ann Aris, and it wasn't giving her back. But if you think these cases are limited to children, you'd be wrong. In January 1980, 41-year-old park ranger Paul Fugate vanished during a routine patrol in Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona. Fugate wasn't some weekend hiker. He was a trained law enforcement ranger who knew the terrain intimately, carried communication equipment, and was expected back at the station within hours. At 2 p.m. on January 13th, he told another ranger he was going to check trails to Faraway Ranch. When he didn't return, fellow rangers immediately launched a search. Adding to the mystery, only his ranger uniform and National Park Service keys were missing from his home. But the most disturbing detail came from a witness. An acquaintance claimed to have seen Paul later that afternoon, slumped between two men in a pickup truck, suggesting something far more sinister than a simple hiking accident. Search efforts were exhaustive and immediate. This was one of their own. Helicopters, tracking dogs, and ground teams searched for months. Fellow rangers who knew Paul personally couldn't comprehend how someone with his training and knowledge could simply cease to exist in terrain he'd patrolled for years. And yet, despite thousands of hours of searching, not a single trace of Paul Fugate has ever been found. The desert, like the forest, had swallowed someone whole and left behind only silence. What's happening in these parks? Why do some searches turn up nothing despite exhaustive efforts? How do people disappear so completely? Keith Reinhardt's disappearance wasn't just bizarre. It was layered with a mystery that seemed almost intentionally designed to haunt investigators. In August 1988, the 49-year-old journalist traveled to Silver Plume, Colorado, a tiny mountain town 70 miles west of Denver, to take a 3-month sabbatical from his work as a sports reporter for the Daily Herald, a suburban Chicago newspaper. He rented a storefront on the town's main street and opened an antique shop. But Keith wasn't just there to sell antiques. He'd become obsessed with investigating the disappearance of Tom Young, the previous owner of the very shop he now occupied. Tom a former high school art teacher and retired Special Forces veteran, vanished exactly 1 year earlier in September 1987, along with his dog Gus. Keith interviewed locals, took extensive notes, and wove the mystery into a novel he was writing, creating a character named Guy Gypsum, who embodied qualities of both himself and the missing man. Then, on August 7, 1988, just days after Tom Young's remains were finally discovered on Republican Mountain by 2 hunters, dead from a bullet wound to the head, Keith Reinhard closed up his antique shop at 5 p.m. and told friends he was hiking to the summit of nearby Pendleton Mountain. He never returned. The irony was staggering. A journalist investigating a disappearance had himself disappeared under equally mysterious circumstances. Search teams launched one of Colorado's most extensive land and air searches. Helicopters circled the peaks. Ground teams scoured the terrain. The search was so massive that a pilot was killed when his small plane crashed in the rocky terrain. Yet despite all the resources deployed, not a single trace of Keith Reinhard has ever been found. No clothing, no backpack, no remains. He simply ceased to exist in the same mountains where the man he'd been investigating had died. Was it coincidence? Some speculated Keith had staged his own disappearance, perhaps wanting to experience what it felt like to vanish so he could write about it authentically. Others believed he'd simply fallen, and his body remained hidden somewhere on the mountain, waiting to be discovered. But decades have passed, and Keith Reinhard remains missing, his novel unfinished, his story incomplete, as if the mountain itself resented his investigation and claimed him as payment. But at least Keith's family can hold on to theories, however unsettling. Not everyone is that fortunate. In July 2015, 2-year-old Dior Coons Jr. vanished during a family camping trip at Timber Creek Campground in Idaho. His parents left him with his great-grandfather, Robert Walton, while they went to explore the campground. When they returned 10 to 15 minutes later, their son was gone. The resulting search became one of the most intensive in Idaho's history. Over 100 searchers, drones, cadaver dogs, and helicopters scoured the area for weeks. Nothing. Dior had simply ceased to exist. What makes this case so deeply troubling isn't just the disappearance, it's what happened during the investigation. As authorities dug deeper, the stories from family members began to shift and contradict. Polygraph tests produced inconclusive results. Private investigators hired by the family concluded Dior was the victim of an accidental homicide, directly accusing the parents of involvement. Yet despite extensive investigations, no concrete proof has ever been found, no charges filed, and no body recovered. The case remains open, unsolved, and maddeningly unresolved. Did Dior vanish into the wilderness like so many others? Or was something far darker at play? Even law enforcement can't say for certain. And then there are the ones who come back changed. Jared Atadero was 3 years old when he disappeared on a trail in Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest in October 1999, hiking with a Christian singles group. Within minutes of starting the hike, Jared simply wasn't there anymore. Massive searches turned up nothing for years until 2003, when hikers discovered his clothing and partial remains on a mountainside so steep and remote that experts said a 3-year-old couldn't possibly have climbed it. But the location of the remains raised questions that authorities couldn't answer. While a mountain lion was suspected, the cause of death was never officially determined, and the circumstances surrounding the discovery left more questions than answers. Just scattered remains in a place they shouldn't have been. The wilderness doesn't follow rules we understand. It doesn't leave evidence we can interpret. And when it does return what it's taken, the answers we get only deepen the mystery. Search and rescue professionals carry the weight of these unsolved cases. David Paulides, a former police detective turned investigator, spent years compiling disappearances in national parks and noticed what he believed were correlations across decades of cases. His work, known as the Missing 411 series, has sparked both interest and controversy, with some viewing his research as revealing hidden patterns, while skeptics dismiss it as conspiracy theory. The National Park Service doesn't keep a centralized database of missing persons. There's no official count, no unified record system tracking how many people vanish within park boundaries each year. When Paulides filed Freedom of Information Act requests for this data, he was told that compiling such a list would cost $1.4 million. Why wouldn't the NPS track something so fundamental? The lack of centralized data makes it difficult to determine whether these disappearances represent a genuine pattern or simply the inevitable result of millions of visitors exploring vast wilderness areas each year. The rational explanations exist for many cases. People get lost. Hypothermia causes paradoxical undressing, making victims remove their clothing in the final stages of freezing to death. Predators exist, and terrain can be treacherous. Weather can change rapidly in mountainous regions, creating disorientation. These are documented phenomena that account for many wilderness deaths. But these explanations struggle when confronted with cases like Dennis Martin, who vanished within minutes while surrounded by family members, or Stacey Ann Arras, whose only trace was a camera lens cap despite massive search efforts in a confined area. Some researchers point to environmental factors we don't fully understand. Sudden weather changes, geological features that interfere with compasses and communication equipment, even infrasound frequencies generated by certain terrain that can cause feelings of dread and confusion. These phenomena have scientific basis, but even these theories fall short when confronted with the sheer speed of some disappearances and the complete absence of evidence in areas that were thoroughly searched. Then there are explanations rooted in human activity. Illegal marijuana grow operations have been discovered in national parks, with growers sometimes resorting to violence to protect their crops. Human trafficking, while difficult to prove in wilderness contexts, remains a possibility that investigators must consider. These are documented realities of criminal activity in remote areas, but they still don't explain the impossible vanishings, the bodies appearing in already searched locations, or the absolute absence of evidence that characterizes so many of these cases. What remains undeniable is this: people continue to vanish in national parks under circumstances that defy easy explanation. Whether this represents a genuine anomaly or simply the statistical inevitability of millions of people entering vast, dangerous wilderness areas is a question that divides researchers, law enforcement, and families of the missing. The search and rescue community knows the grim statistics. After 72 hours, survival rates plummet. They know that in terrain as vast and unforgiving as America's national parks, bodies can remain hidden for years, decades, or forever. But knowing these facts doesn't make the cases any less haunting or the questions any easier to answer. The families never stop searching. The loved ones of the missing spend decades walking the same trails, hoping for any sign, any closure that never comes. Dennis Martin's family spent years advocating for better search protocols, their lives forever fractured by those minutes when he ducked behind a bush and never emerged. George Arras never stopped seeking answers about his daughter Stacey, the 14-year-old who walked toward the lakes with her camera and simply vanished. These aren't statistics or case numbers. They're parents who set the table for children who will never come home. Siblings who grow old, wondering what happened to the brother or sister who simply walked into the trees. The wilderness took their loved ones, and in return, offered only a silence so complete, it feels deliberately cruel. What makes these disappearances so uniquely devastating is the absence of answers. When someone dies in a car accident or from illness, there's grief. But there's also closure, a funeral, a burial, a final goodbye. But when someone vanishes without a trace in a national park, the families are left suspended in a nightmare that never ends. They can't mourn properly because they don't know for certain their loved one is dead. They can't move forward because every unsolved case, every new disappearance, reignites the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, their missing person will be the one who returns. It's a psychological torture that can last decades. And for many families, it lasts a lifetime. The search and rescue community carries its own scars. Rangers who've spent weeks searching for someone, only to find nothing, describe an indescribable weight that never lifts. Some eventually leave the profession, unable to reconcile the failures with their training and experience. Others become dedicated to improving search protocols, analyzing past cases to prevent future tragedies. They know the grim statistics, that after 72 hours, the chances of finding someone alive drop dramatically. They know the reality that families struggle to accept, that in vast wilderness areas with challenging terrain, it's entirely possible for remains to stay hidden for years, decades, or forever, slowly reclaimed by nature until nothing identifiable remains. But knowledge doesn't ease the burden. Every ranger who's been part of an unsuccessful search carries questions that never fully fade. Could they have searched differently? Was there an area they didn't adequately cover? These questions stay with them, particularly during quiet moments alone in the wilderness they've dedicated their lives to protecting and serving. The truth is this: wilderness remains, in many ways, fundamentally wild and uncontrollable. Despite our technology, our experience, and our best efforts, people continue to vanish in national parks under circumstances that challenge our understanding. The next time you stand at a trailhead looking into the forest beyond, remember that thousands have walked similar paths safely, but some did not return. Pack carefully. Tell someone exactly where you're going and when you expect to be back. Respect the power of nature, because despite all our preparations and precautions, we're entering places where the rules of civilization don't always apply. The wilderness is vast. The wilderness is patient. And the wilderness ultimately answers to no one.